everything that I thought was appropriate and useful as a disciplinary approach was really blowing up in my face. So what is wrong? That's a horrible, horrible question to have to ask. But I think that's the problem that the label causes. The label tells us what adults around your child are feeling. They are feeling opposed and they are feeling defied. And they're saying that's not okay. And so that's why we call it ODD. It doesn't tell us anything about the child at all.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. Before I introduce my guest and topic today, I have a quick announcement. And that is that the doors to my Differently Wired Club are open for new members for this week only, from today through Friday, September 25th. While I know that many of us love learning from podcasts and books and summits, including me, sometimes applying and integrating these strategies so we can truly transform our families can be difficult when we are just so consumed with getting through the day-to-day, especially in these unusual times of COVID-19. I created the Differently Wired Club to help parents do this deep work within a supportive community where we're all working toward the same goals. The club includes live coaching calls, virtual office hours, a monthly book club featuring guest appearances by authors of some of your favorite parenting books, monthly themes, a private community for connection and support, and more. So if this feels like the kind of support you could use right now, go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. Okay, and now on to this week's episode. Today I'm covering a topic that is both new to the podcast and often shrouded in confusion and controversy: Oppositional Defiant Disorder, or ODD. To shed some light on this topic is my guest, Amelia Bowler, a writer, teacher, mother, and behavioral analyst with a master's degree in applied disability studies. ODD became personal for Amelia when her own son was diagnosed, and her quest for understanding, combined with her curiosity about the why of behavior, eventually led to her new book, The Parent's Guide to Oppositional Defiant Disorder: Your Questions Answered. I had a chance to review this book before it was published, and I found it to be an invaluable resource for parents trying to make sense of this diagnosis. Over the years, I have received many requests from listeners to do an episode on this topic, so I'm thrilled to finally be able to share this with you. In our conversation, Amelia explains what ODD is and what it isn't, how to better understand ODD in the context of behavioral and relational science, and many, many strategies and tips to support kids with this profile. What I especially appreciate is Amelia's vast understanding of the research combined with her passionate, empathetic, and relationship-centered approach. I hope you get a lot out of this conversation with Amelia. Hey, Amelia, welcome to the podcast.
I am so excited to be here. You have no idea. Heart pounding.
All right, listeners, I do know because she told me before I hit record. So really excited that you're here as well. This is the first time I've done an episode in over 200 episodes on oppositional defiance disorder. And I think this is one of those. Well, we'll get into it, but there's just so much misinformation and myths about what this is. So I'm excited you're going to break it down for us. But before we get to that, can you take a few minutes just to more casually introduce yourself, tell us about who you are in the world and your story. And actually, I'd love to know, as part of that, how you came to even write this book.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I'm Amelia Bowler. And when I was a kid, they didn't really have a word for people like me, but my parents used the term severely gifted.
Interesting.
I was clearly struggling. But, she's so smart and she's doing great on all those standardized tests, so she's probably fine. She just needs to get organized. And I'm sure a large percentage of people who listen have had that same experience, or they've seen that happen to their kids. I think now you would call me a twice exceptional kid. And I sort of grew into an adult who had no idea why she was so bad at her job and couldn't write things down properly. And the only person in the office who was drinking hot chai and sour gummies to try to get through a day. So I was diagnosed with ADHD, and then the world started to make more sense. And I think that was partly when I started to get interested in psychiatric diagnosis and what we call things and what the process of labeling does to our lives. I'd always been interested in challenging behavior, like being a kid who challenged people, having my own kid who was just a champion at finding his way around everybody's gold standard. This is how I discipline. He would limbo under it or leap over it. And so I knew that there was going to be more to understand about him. And I also had this educational background as a teacher. So I really wanted to figure out what was it that would I always imagined I was a teacher and I would create a classroom that was for people like me because I was so bored and so frustrated. And so I looked in all these different methods to see okay, well, what makes teaching efficient? I wasn't really satisfied with what I was getting in my educational degree. So I took a Master's of Applied Disability Study. And what that did was it gave me a background in what it's like to be disabled, which is an amazing way to look at the world. And it taught me a lot about myself. And it also focused on behavioral analysis, which is a relatively new sort of offshoot of psychology. And it really, really focuses on what are we seeing? Where is it coming from? And I think that was a good foothold, but it definitely didn't tell me the whole story. So a lot of the work that I did for researching this book, I just did because I was trying to figure out my own situation. And I started writing about it on my blog. And fortunately, a publisher at Jessica Kingsley saw it and said, would you like to write more about this? And I said, yes, very much yes.
Oh, that's awesome. So, all right. And so you then wanted to tackle oppositional defiance disorder. And the name of your book is The Parent's Guide to Oppositional Defiance Disorder. I will just say that this was something I think that personally came on my radar during maybe the second neuropsych that we did with my son Asher, maybe when he was 8. It might have even been earlier than that when we were told that there were some defiant behaviors, just defiant disorder tendencies. But this idea of ODD being something that might be going on with my son, and I started looking it up, and I was really unhappy with the information I found because it really felt like it was shaming me as a parent that this was something I had created in my child. And so what I would love for you to do as we start getting into this is just tell us, what is ODD? How would you define it? Because there are people who don't even think it's a real thing.
Yes. Okay. I think I had exactly the same reaction when I looked it up. The psychologist who were assessing my child said, he does meet criteria for ODD, but we're not going to diagnose right now because there's no treatment that goes along with it, aside from what we're doing for him with ADHD. And I thought, oh, that's super unhelpful. And yes, I looked up all those articles in every conceivable publication asking me, well, to look back, hey, what did you do? How did you screw this up? And I thought, I'm the person who's usually at the front of the room doing the parent training. I understand what they mean by be firm, be consistent, don't get into a coercive cycle. That's not happening. But everything that I thought was appropriate and useful as a disciplinary approach was really blowing up in my face. So what is wrong? That's a horrible, horrible question to have to ask. But I think that's the problem that the label causes. The label tells us what adults around your child are feeling. They are feeling opposed and they are feeling defied. And they're saying that's not okay. And so that's why we call it ODD. It doesn't tell us anything about the child at all. So I guess as I was writing the book, I really wanted to understand. I think first I tried to understand, well, what about all those other kids who don't get this diagnosis? What's going on with them? Why did they go along with so many things that my kid seems to think is unacceptable and hard and horrible? Why is it easy for other kids? So I tried it on from that point of view and then started to dig as much as I could into the scientific literature. What does this mean? Why does my son respond differently, for example, to something like a correction, like, oh, hey, bud, don't do that, or can you come back here?
So I love the way that you said this is how the parents are experiencing this, that they're feeling opposed and they're feeling defied. I mean, that to me just really sums it up, doesn't it? it wasn't talking about the child's areas of lagging skills. It was very focused on the conflict and the will that our child has, or the way that they are not bending to ours. And that felt really strange to me. And this idea that, is it environmental? Is it an actual diagnosis on its own? So can you actually answer that question? Is it in the DSM? Is it something that you can somewhat clearly check off symptoms that result in this diagnosis?
Sure. It is in the DSM-5, and it is also in the IC-10, which is what the World Health Organization uses. So you might hear it outside of the US and Canada. But, and I think this is something that psychologists understand and maybe assume other people understand, it's what's called a behavioral diagnosis. So it's not something that you can look at a EEG or a CAT scan and say, okay, there it is. That's the part of the brain that we associate with this disorder. Or we can't see a clear gene marker that says, yeah, it's definitely coming from this part. It's not a physiological difference, and it's not even clearly tied to an environment, because you can have one child who has these oppositional defiant symptoms and 3 other kids in the same family who are doing fine. So clearly it's some kind of interaction between the environment and the child and the expectations that are being put on the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You pointed to something really important when you talked about the symptoms, because the symptoms are actually very, very broad. And the more I looked at it, this was really interesting to me. There are 3 different sections in the diagnosis. One section describes symptoms of irritability. They're using that word, meaning, the child is annoyed with you, or easily frustrated, crying, sort of easily upset. The next section is about children who are headstrong. I hope you can hear the quotes around that. That is when you say, hey, let's do this. They say, no, thank you. I'd rather do that. And it's not so much an emotional conversation. It's just a struggle between how are we going to make this decision and who's going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third part is they use the word vindictive, which is a pretty heavy label to put on a child as well. But I think what they're describing is a child who is hurt and upset and is directing that back at other people. I feel like you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, or I'm going to show you how I feel, and this is how I'm going to show you. So because you don't have to have every single symptom, you could have one child who is very sensitive and easily upset. You could have another child who's sort of like a rhinoceros going through the day, making confident decisions that no one else agrees with. And these 2 very different children are being given the same label. So something's up.
So what is up then?
Yes. What is up? What is up with ODD? That should have been the name of my book. I think what we've done is we've taken a bunch of children who have parents who feel the same way, and we've put them in the same group, and we've tried to study them and figure out what's the same about all of them. So unfortunately, what happens when you get a group that diverse, you don't get any clear answers. You say, okay, some of these kids come from tough backgrounds where maybe their parents are poor, stressed, there's domestic violence or abuse, or just, ongoing marital struggle in the home, and something's going on, and it's probably having an effect on the child here. You can take another group and say, well, these kids have learning differences. They have executive functioning deficits. They're not able to, switch attention as easily as some other children. There's a huge overlap between an ADD and an ODD diagnosis, but there are kids who have ADD and no ODD symptoms, and vice versa. So yeah, there's something going on over there. What I've tried to do in the book is give parents, almost like little filters, those color filters where you put them all together and they look white, and then you take them out, you look at them one at a time, like red, green, blue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to give parents a chance to look through these filters one at a time, because there are a lot of different situations that can create the same looking symptoms.
Well, any differently wired kid, right? We know that it's rarely one diagnosis, 2 symptoms, and here's what you do about it.
Yeah.
There's so much comorbidity between an overlap within ADHD and autism spectrum and profound giftedness. All those things overlap, and, it's very complicated. So you mentioned ADHD and ODD, there's a lot of overlap. Do you see it with other neurodifferences as well, that it's very common? Or can a child, it sounds like what you said is a child may have just an ODD diagnosis, and that might be more the result of their environmental circumstances?
Could be the relationships, the way that people communicate with this child is very direct and very forceful, and you better do it or else. And they've picked up those tactics and they're using them in ways where people are not expecting them to apply. It could also be that in a family system, everybody's so stressed that maybe some of the child's needs aren't being met, and the child is really, really stressed as well. And that's going to lead to irritability and not wanting to follow some of the instructions. But sometimes it's not a want to or feel like, sometimes it's honestly a can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm jumping around. There are certainly habits and communication styles that can come across as oppositional defiant. There are certainly situations that can really stress out a child. I think Mona Delahook was really great at opening my eyes to some of this and how the neurology of stress works and how I need to keep that in mind rather than just focusing on logic and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't start out knowing that. So lowering the stress level overall for the child, that could be so many different things as well. That could be sensory. That could be difficulty switching attention. So the whole world says it's music time and your brain is still completely absorbed in the task that you're doing right now. And it's uncomfortable to have to switch. So the child says, no, it's not personal. It's not like I refuse to do anything you say. It's just, I really, really, really want to do this and not that. And while it might come easily to some other people to just say, okay, and to just give up on that, whatever mission they were on, whatever desire they had, whatever need they had, some kids will just say, okay, even if their needs aren't met. But there are some kids who are just great at advocating for themselves.
That should be the name for your book, right?
Great advocators.
Yeah. Yeah. Even just hearing you talk about this, and I read your book. I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of it. I liked it so much, I gave it a blurb for the book. So, and I still find this very complicated. I still find this to be kind of muddy in places, this idea of ODD and what does it mean if we get that diagnosis, and what does it mean about us as parents, and what does it mean for our kids? And it's complicated. And I want to throw in there too, there may be listeners who are thinking, what is the difference between ODD and PDA, pathological demand avoidance, which is something that, I've had a couple of guests on the show talk about in the past year and seems to be gaining much more awareness in the US. So can you touch upon that specifically? Is there overlap between these two things? Because PDA is definitely a can't, not a won't kind of a situation. We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50.
The research that I've done on PDA is not very deep, and unfortunately, there's not a huge body of research on it right now because it isn't in the DSM, as far as I know, because it hasn't been updated in a few years. And some people would even call it a facet of autism spectrum disorder. So I don't know how many kids will be getting that diagnosis. And yeah, it could be labeled in exactly the same way, and it could be coming from a totally different direction. So I didn't cover that in the book, Pathological Demand Avoidance. But certainly you could look at a child who's struggling in that way and just say they're being defiant.
Mm-hmm.
To try to untangle it a little bit, the strands that we're really looking at are, as a parent, am I finding the resources to be okay, to have a feeling of safety within myself so that when I communicate with my child, I communicate that in a way that makes them feel safe? Am I together enough that I can see what's happening in front of me instead of rigidly trying to push through the thing that I think needs to happen? Am I engaged? Am I present? So that's really the first section. You may be struggling with that because your child is struggling in lots of other ways. So it's never just like your fault as a parent, but that's something that really has to get fortified. Like you got to get mega vitamins in your self-regulation so that you can deal with these other strands.
I love that because I think that's where it starts for us as parents of any differently wired child. We have to fortify ourselves. We have to have like our emotional regulation vitamins, whatever you want to call it. We need to do that work on ourselves in order for us to show up for who our kids are. So it sounds like with a child who has oppositional defiance disorder, whether they're diagnosed with that officially, they have that label, or they have those tendencies, that this is even more critical to start with.
Oh, yeah. I read one really cool study. I think it was by Dr. Russell Barkley, who was studying mom's behavior with kids who have ADHD on and off their medication. So he sort of used the kids as their own control group. And when they were off their medication, they were less compliant. And so what he measured was how mom is reacting. And it was actually a lot easier for the children to change the parent's behavior than it was for the parent to change the child's behavior. We really got to keep our hands on the steering wheel because it's tough.
It is tough. And it is a cycle, right? It's like this loop. And once we get on, it's really hard to get untangled from that.
Yeah. And I guess I should specify, I mean, our own personal steering wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I never say kids with oppositional defiant disorder because I just don't feel like I have the right to say that because I really question the value of that diagnosis. But I will say kids diagnosed with ODD or kids who have oppositional defiant behavior, oftentimes we're trying to keep our hands on their steering wheel and we're going for a crazy ride. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I want to hear more about what we can do, like what parents can do.
Absolutely. Okay. So I guess if we're going to use driving as a metaphor, the second chapter is really about the signals. Like, are we giving clear signals? Like, our kid is in the driver's seat. They're going where they want to go. Are we signaling, like, this is a great way to go. This is a safe way to go. Here, come along with me. Or, you really need to stop going over there. It's very dangerous over there. The way we signal will affect our child. And that's just the way we speak to them. It's the routines that we have, the expectations. When there's a flood and all the lights go out, like in some families, a feeling of crisis can do that. It can just, all bets are off. One thing's okay today, not okay tomorrow. It's confusing. Isn't it strange how sometimes it just takes so much longer to get anywhere when the usual traffic lights are disrupted?
Mm-hmm.
In this chapter, I also talk about how to have that positive relationship, how to have that engaged relationship. It was surprisingly difficult to hear that described in the literature, but I think John Gottman does a beautiful job of it when he describes emotion coaching. And he's done some really nice research to demonstrate when you see a group of parents and you measure the way they're present and engaged and validating their kids' feelings and setting boundaries and coaching their kids, basically, you do get different outcomes versus parents who are dismissing, who are being sarcastic, who are minimizing their kids' experience and being over controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you can never set up an experimental condition where you tell parents to do the wrong thing, but he's such a dedicated researcher that I think he's really done a great job of establishing what it looks like where we should be aiming within our warm communication, also having, standards and expectations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's respectful, right? It's respectful communication, respectful parenting, and we can still have boundaries and when we do that, but it is, I can see how with the child who is more defiant, that sticking with that top-down approach, my way or the highway kind of thing, is just going to further entrench them.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think sometimes it's not just a question of, am I incentivizing one behavior or another? Am I punishing one behavior or another? You've also got a child who's got an emotional life, who's got beliefs, who's got thoughts that they're not sharing with you. So it's not just a question of putting the cheese in the maze and, getting the route that you want. If we're not driving our children's behavior like that. It's much more of a relationship. So I wanted to focus on that next.
Mm-hmm.
In other places in the book, I talk about where a child's intellectual struggles might come into play, because you might have this wonderful, warm relationship. You might be really clearly signaling, and you say it's time for dinner, and suddenly there's tears and rolling under the couch and no, no, no. And well, what's going on? We always have dinner. This is strange. And in my work as a behavior consultant, I've been lucky enough to sort of work with these families and see how sometimes for children, and this is not necessarily what you would call an intellectual disability, but kids may have trouble planning ahead or anticipating what's going to happen next. They may have trouble when you say 5 more minutes, they may have no idea what that means. And this is not just for exceptional kids. This could be for all kinds. So how do we communicate in a way that is going to make sense to our kids, especially if they're easily overwhelmed? Maybe we've given them a list of 5 things to do, and they don't even know how to get started on one. So they say, no, I can't. It's too hard. That's not defiance. That's just difficulty with short-term memory. Mm-hmm. So I looked at the research because it's really not fair to say one way or another, okay, he has ODD, and so he has a brain disorder. Somebody did something wrong when he was in the womb. That's really, really not fair. But it could be that some parts of their thinking, planning, managing are feeling overwhelmed, are kind of short-circuiting. And sometimes that looks like a big emotional outburst. So you might say this child has an emotion problem, but in fact, it's the way they're thinking about the problem that's just not able to keep up with what you're expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. And also, just to go back to something you said earlier, I love that you just called out that our children have emotional lives of their own. And I think that's something we often forget, just hearing you say it like that. It's yes, they are their own people. They have their own internal dialogue, their own belief systems, their own emotional life. And when we forget that, that's when we run into trouble, right?
But that really comes from us and the expectations that we put on ourselves. Dana Abraham from Calm the Chaos, she, I think, really shines a light on this in her work. helping parents understand what expectations they're bringing to the table, what parts of their family and history and culture shape what they think their kids should be. So I've been called out a few times on that and really been hard on myself. Like, you're a teacher, you're a behavior analyst, he should be listening to you. Why do you let him do that? So my desire to control my kid is not necessarily because I'm some kind of power freak, but I just feel like I'm failing if I don't do this. So letting myself off the hook and having different expectations of myself has been, well, a relief for everybody, I think.
For sure. Some of the most important work I did. Absolutely. Especially as a type A person who's used to being really good at stuff, to then have a child who's got their own plan and is not making you feel like you're doing a good job, that can be very triggering.
Yeah. Sometimes I say, like, even when it hurts, I'll try to say it in a funny way. Like, well, I got some frank feedback this morning. I got a 0-star Yelp review from my child.
Yep. Been there. Yeah. Yes. So, all right. So we've talked about, first of all, this, just for listeners, this part 2 of Amelia's book is addressing challenging behaviors from the inside out. And so that's what she's walking us through. So these different ways to support our kids. So what else can you share with us specifically about how we can better understand and support the emotional regulation skill development in our kids? Like, what do they actually need to work through this and to better be able to cope with the demands being placed on them?
Yeah. This was something that I did have to look deeply at because I wasn't familiar with the research. But it is so connected to my ability to self-regulate, my ability to maintain my relationship with my child. Even when he's telling me everything I'm doing is wrong, I still have to show up for him. And actually, that is half the job, is modeling the empathetic listening. That's how he learns to be empathetic with himself. That's how he learns how to be empathetic with other people.
Yeah. And that can happen in about a month's time then. This is no, I just, sarcasm. I always like to kind of lay out for listeners what they can expect, because what I know, having been the parent of a child who was defiant and very emotionally dysregulated, that I wanted answers and I wanted to know how to stop the behavior, how to get things moving in a different direction. And it took a lot longer than what I had hoped for. And so can you kind of lay out what this even looks like, what we can expect if we're starting to really consider changing how we parent our child who has ODD tendencies?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, this was scary for me as somebody who had never looked at emotion from a scientific perspective before, because there's a lot of controversy about it. But I think what's understood is that there are things around us that will trigger us, that will give us an immediately physical response. For example, you see a mouse in the corner of your kitchen and your heart starts pounding right away. You have this huge emotional reaction. And then you start thinking about it, maybe rationally, like, oh yeah, that's actually not a mouse, that's my kid's hamster. And you make decisions about whether it's a threat or not. This is really where our kids start. They're walking around having physical reactions to their environment. They have no idea what they mean, and they don't know how to interpret it to themselves. So sometimes we're helping the kids, identify, yeah, you're having a big reaction right now, and I know it feels really scary. Let's figure out together if this is something that we need to be very scared about. And it obviously doesn't happen by rote, but I guess I'm trying to emphasize that emotional self-regulation is a very long and complicated process. And that's really the first step. Is right now, your child might be reacting to everything like it's a threat. It might be a look on your face. It might be a tone of your voice that feels threatening. And there's this huge stress reaction. You say, whoa, where did that come from? So really patiently observing those triggers. Sometimes they're going to be right there, like they happened just 1 second ago. Sometimes they're going to build up over time. So if I can try to say something useful, when you're really at the end of one of those tornado days, if you sit down and just write and pretend you're writing to your most awesome friend, or, write in a group of people who really deeply understand, just map out like, well, what happened? I said this and he said this, and then we did this and that seemed to work. When we look at it in retrospect, sometimes we can untie some of those knots. Sometimes our memory starts to fill in some of the blanks that we had when we were just reacting to the situation. We go, oh yeah, he didn't start that until his brother came in. Maybe it's something to do with this. Oh yeah, it started about 4:30, but he hadn't eaten for 3 hours. We can start to see those triggers in our child's environment, but it's so hard to see them if we're reacting to ourselves. When we're reacting to our kids, we really need to do a debrief sometimes to see some of those really subtle things.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's such worthwhile work to do, is to take the time. And I've had, parent coaches and therapists tell me in the past, like, start keeping a journal of the regressions or start noticing, what's happening. And it seemed like just too much work to do. Honestly, I was like, really? Like, you want me to start? Like, I'm just happy to be surviving today. And now I've got to write about it too. But it can be so helpful because, as you said, there's always a reason. And we can start to, when we get a little distance from it, we can start to find those connections.
Yeah. And our goal is not to make them stop crying or make them do what we want. Our goal is really to figure out, okay, where did that start? How can I help you handle that thing so we can do what's important to both of us? And I can't emphasize that enough, because sometimes we really feel like, well, if I don't just get out of this situation as soon as possible, the world's over. Like, we're panicking. It's so easy to flip out and to assume, well, this is my future now. If I don't handle this today with the biggest consequence I could think of, then I failed as a human being.
Right.
So one thing that our kids who are diagnosed with ODD often have in common is impulse control. So maybe we're all having the same emotions, but the kid who's diagnosed with ODD is the one who's telling you about all of them. Mm-hmm. They're like, the volume is turned up. And when they're told to stop, it's harder for them to stop. And this is something that has been borne out in the research as well. There's some really cool tests where you can put kids together and test their ability to just put the brakes on. Oh, that's not going to pay off. Stop doing that. It'll take longer for some kids. They will persist. And, you can test it with video games. How many more times will they press the button? But that helps me a lot as a parent, because it might not be my child's moral character that they said, shut up to me 8 more times than I was expecting them to. Or it might not be my failing as a parent that I didn't give the right reaction. It could be that when my child is in this emotional state, it is so, so, so hard for him to stop. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, the best thing that we know while our kids' brains are growing and changing is to use practice. Like, when it's your first day on the job, they don't throw you in and say, yell instructions over your shoulder. And that's often what we do with our kids. We have great advice for them, but we expect them to use the advice in the moment. And they're paying attention to so many other things.
It makes sense to me, right? Come on, this is good advice I'm giving you.
Yeah. I'm closed captioning your life.
Yeah.
But if your child has difficulty with impulse control, the best possible override is a response that's been practiced. And the best way to do that is training in those lower pressure situations. And what we know about some kids who are diagnosed with ODD, with or without ADD, is that although they may have great planning skills and they may have, you test them on their executive functioning when they're in a good mood, totally fine. If you play a game with them and they lose repeatedly, you test them again, they're doing way worse than the other kids. Their ability to self-regulate has just gone through the floor. And it's tough because these are the kids who are being diagnosed alongside other kids who have problems every minute of the day, and we can't tell them apart when we read the research. So we just really have to go through these things one at a time. But the best way that we know to help your child come up with the right reaction in the moment is to practice. Play, use puppets if you need to, send text messages to each other, practicing, script it if you need to. We all have scripts. Parent training is full of scripts. We practice scripts with each other so that we'll know what to say when our hearts are racing and we're sweating because this is a messy situation. And so that's a great thing to be able to offer our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to do a lot of role playing, just okay, what's it going to look like when I call you to dinner? let's practice it once and see how it goes. And that was very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do it as adults. And I think that when kids are following a plan that they've made ahead of time, it's much easier to say no to those little distractions, those little impulses.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview, digging into tough topics with experts I trust, and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.
So, all right, I have 2 questions I want to get to. One is, can you give us a sense or give parents, maybe I'm asking for some hope, but a sense of the trajectory? So if a parent has a child who's been identified as being defiant, as potentially having this label of ODD, is it something that with all these methods or, all of these support systems and the work that we do as parents, is this something that our kids can, I don't know if outgrow is the right word, but can, this can change?
Right. There are very few adults who do have a diagnosis of ODD. And I think that's largely because those of us who are rebellious and don't enjoy taking instructions start our own businesses or we get a podcast where we make people listen to us. We find our way to make our voices heard. And we find our niche and we can avoid doing the things that we hate doing that everybody expects us to do. So in a sense, life will change around your child and they will find ways to be more comfortable. In an important sense, maturity helps in all of these areas. Just the brain development is bound to help with emotional self-regulation, executive functioning, relationships. We learn every day. That's good news. When you look at the research, you may not see such great news, but unfortunately, that's because we've taken a pile of kids with a bunch of different struggles and we've given every one of them the same exact treatment. And we've said, oh, it's weird, only 40% of them got better. Yeah, only 40% of them had the struggle that you were trying to address. So even if the research is sometimes a little bit like, not super encouraging. I do think that as we grow as a culture and as the field of psychiatry grows, we'll be able to give a diagnosis that really points parents in the right direction. Like, oh, I see that you're having a difficulty with a coercive cycle. You're threatening, your child is threatening. Here's a program that will help you de-escalate in these emotional situations and stop using pressure tactics on each other. Great, wonderful. Maybe another child with a diagnosis will be given counseling to deal with anxiety because they're saying no because everything feels wrong and scary. So with the right treatment, I have so much hope. And every family I meet, like, it's just such an honor to work with people. Like, the love parents have for their kids just overwhelms me and gives me goosebumps every day. So I believe that parents who are well equipped can absolutely walk with their children through this. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that works. I just think that we've been giving bad advice and sending people in the wrong direction for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that walk with your children through this because, again, it comes back to relationship and connection always with our kids and understanding who they are and being fluent in them and ourselves. So it is deep work, but I see that you can move through it and get to the other side. So one last question. I just wanted to circle back because you talked about, you question the benefits perhaps of the label itself. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that? Is it something, I just would love to know your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, would I want to have a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder? Personally, at this moment in my life, I would say I don't wish that on my son right now because it's something that could be misunderstood by other people. I mean, there's already enough in his file at school. I don't want it to signal to people like this is a kid that you should give up on. It does sound like a period at the end of a sentence. It's really not. It's what we're seeing right now, and there's lots of other ways to describe that. On the other hand, if you're in a situation where you would like to have counseling, you would like to have different kinds of social skills programs because, making friends can be hard for kids who are not always very flexible, you may have to call it something to get your insurance to cover it. So in that case, I would say absolutely go for it, but it's not something that helps other people understand what your child is struggling with easily at this point, until everyone reads my book, and then we're good.
Yeah, it's so true. It is one of those labels that is just like, I mean, even those of us working in this space, we don't even really understand what it is. And it is so negative. Like, there's no way you can hear oppositional defiant disorder and think, awesome, that has a lot of cool gifts.
Yeah, parent, no teacher is like, wow, I'm so excited. I have 3 ODD kids in my class this year.
It's really tricky and complicated. So that's why I think that the book you've written and that you are out there trying to demystify what ODD is and to create more understanding is so important. So thank you, first of all, for writing the book. Thank you for coming and talking with us about it today. I have a feeling there's going to be more questions about this, so we may have to do a part 2. I'll be very curious to hear what the feedback is from the community on the Facebook group. But before we go, could you tell listeners how they can learn more about you and connect with you?
Well, yes. And thank you so much for helping me get this message out. I've been yelling at it in a room for a long time, but it's really nice to have other people going, yeah, we agree with that. We needed to hear that. If you want to find me, my website is ameliabowler.com. I'm on Facebook. I have a little page where I post my artwork. So that's called Creative Connected Parenting. I post my paintings and I share things with people on Instagram. So hopefully you'll be able to find me there too. And I'm so excited to hear what people's questions are. I will never stop being curious about this. And I'm happy to give you any amount of time to talk about it in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. And listeners, I will include links, of course, to Amelia's social media handles and information in the book on the show notes page. And then I'm just thinking, I'm trying to do some more Facebook Lives on the Tilt Together group. So let's talk about maybe bringing you in to do one of those and taking people's questions. So listeners, if you want me to do that, let me know as well. Shoot me an email and we'll see if we can make it happen. Amelia, thank you so much. It was really lovely to connect with you. Again, the book, everyone, is called The Parent's Guide to Oppositional Defiant Disorder, Your Questions Answered. And yeah, I really appreciated you sharing all this with us today.
Oh, this conversation has made me so happy. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.